Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Episode 15, Marise Kumar leads at the macro and individual levels. It's time to talk about leadership at the C-suite. With that, let's get started. When I think of customer experience and omnichannel marketing, I think of Marise Kumar. Marise is someone who's worked for big companies like Best Buy, Lowe's, Whirlpool, Colgate-Palmolive, and in her roles, she's done a lot of company-changing initiatives that would either make or break how the company moves forward. That definitely has an impact on the bottom line. These days, Marise does consulting and works through a company called C2B Strategies, which she founded. In her current role, she works with nonprofits, for-profits. She works globally, locally. If you need help with customer experience or your value proposition, Marise is ready to serve. If you sat down with Marise, I think you'd find her to be delightful and optimistic. She's a good person. Part 1, Montessori and the Leadership Category. Leadership isn't a box that you just pull out and apply to any situation. There's a lot of variables that go into it. Who you are, where you're at, the people around you, what you're trying to accomplish. All this has an effect on how a person might lead. If you're interested in what leadership is, go back to episode 2, where I spend some time defining what leadership is in relation to management and how the two are completely different. But for now, think of leadership as something that's situational. Marise knows something about this. Marise shares a relevant story. Here she is.
There was a point where I was working with Whirlpool. I was a vice president and general manager of value brands and emerging categories. And we were going through transformational change, putting the consumer back in the center, product to brand, Midwest to global.
Just small change management things.
Yes, nothing major.
Nothing major, no.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Part of this was the organization had said, okay, you know what? We need to define the leadership behaviors that match this new culture, because the old behaviors that we used to have, they don't match this new vision that we have for the company. And so they had defined and were defining how leaders would behave in different situations. So this was all going on in the office, and this was great. And I had a meeting. My son was 4 years old at the time, and he was in his Montessori school. And it was the annual teacher conference. Do you know what it's like when you go in for the teacher conference? You go into the classroom, you sit down on those little chairs, and then they bring out this piece of paper, which is all of the points and categories of how your child is doing, what they're good at, what they're bad at, et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing that struck me was one of the categories that she talked about was leadership.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, wow, this was not what I was expecting. I was expecting to hear what he was good at. Was he well behaved? And I can't remember what else she said about him. Or what she said under leadership, but it did strike me that, wow, this is a category that doesn't only exist in one situation, and there's not just one definition. There's different sets of behaviors based on the different person and the different situation, and it's something that emerges. That's something that struck me and really helped me think about leadership in a different way.
Tell me if this resonates with you. You lead from the perspective of your role or whatever the job is that you're doing.
Yes. And in fact, there are 3 buckets that when I think back over the different challenges and situations that I've sort of jumped into. And one has been based on who I am, sort of knowing myself, where I'm coming from, what influences my behavior and how I think about things. The second is the actual challenge. Does it excite me? Does it stir up things? And does it make me energized to think about doing it? And then the third thing is, how do others think about it? Why do they care? And so as I think about those three, almost whether it's buckets or pillars, that's how I think about the different challenges that I've been through.
By the way, I'll share this with you. Supposedly, I flunked out of Montessori school. I was too rebellious, independent, wanting to do my own thing, and I think I would have fit perfectly in the Montessori school that you just described.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting approach of choosing, of giving the choice to the child to think about what they want to, what are the options on what they think is right.
Yes.
You're not telling them the answer. You're suggesting a way of thinking and suggesting answers.
Part 2, Unreasonable Confidence. If you're at the C-suite, much of what you do is critiquing the direction that the company's going. Why this way? What needs to happen now to get to your destination? And part of it is facing ambiguity with determination. To do that, you have to trust your people and be able to rely on them to get things done. Marie shares a couple of stories that shed some light into this. Again, here's Marise.
First, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because that is sort of where I'm coming from, will help you understand the examples I'm going to give you. Three things. One is I've been in diverse situations for most of my life. So places where I've had a different set of experiences from the people I've met with or been working with.
Okay.
I was born in the UK to Indian parents. I moved in my teens to India at a time when there was very little global travel and my British accent stood out like a sore thumb. And then in the corporate world, getting things done in the boardroom, where I was often the only woman of color who was also a senior leader. In those cases, I always look for the quiet voices in the room, whether it's the elderly man who's hanging back because he's been told that he's kind of aged out, or the young woman who's trying to insert an idea and can't quite get her voice heard. Or if it's that, there's the newcomer who's sitting at the table and isn't quite sure of the vocabulary that's being used.
Yeah.
As you said, the acronyms and whether their point of view is relevant. So I tend to always reach out, and that has impacted my leadership behaviors and leadership style. The second is that I'm a real believer in differentiation and that products can make a difference to people's lives. Growing up, my mom worked in the house, and as a little girl, I would watch the weekly routine. Monday was washing, Tuesday was ironing, Wednesday was cleaning, and then Thursday was shopping, Friday was dressmaking.
Okay.
And I still remember the day a twin tub washing machine arrived. Okay. It changed her life. I mean, I remember the guys coming in and, she had a place for it. And that really, you could see the pride and her self-esteem. It changed her life. The second was her Necky sewing machine, which, she's 93 today. She still has that sewing machine.
Oh, no kidding.
That changed her life because the creativity, what it enabled her to do was amazing. And so I've always brought that belief that if you come up with, do that little extra that makes that product change people's lives. Now, obviously, it's not changing it in it's not a life and death situation, but frankly, the small little things of how well you think about yourself. Has it been a good day? Those are the sort of small things that a product can help in a person's life. So that's the second thing of, believing in differentiation and that it really can make a difference to someone's life. And then, the third one I think comes a little bit from my history, which is that I'm very, very comfortable with change, often more comfortable than the average person. And so I tend to jump into change. Oh yeah, let's do this. We can do this. And then I have to make sure that I look around the room to see how many people are putting up their hands saying, watch out.
Yeah, people are ready to put on the brakes.
Yes, exactly. Oh, so I have to be, that's again, a little bit about that I have to know about myself as I go into a situation. So knowing that as my background, I'll give you a couple of situations where, and leadership situations where those are the factors that I've kind of brought to the table.
Okay.
So the first is I was working with Whirlpool and we were launching, not only launching, and then a second time we went back and relaunched the brand in India. The other second example I'll give you was when we were within Lowe's, looking at it being much more customer-centric, putting the consumer back into how we planned and looked at the business. In both of those cases, you can understand where I'm coming from in terms of focus on the consumer, bringing about change, what you can understand why it was something that interested me. Specifically, in the case of the launch of the Whirlpool brand in India, bringing better performance, ice in 20 minutes, washing machine, increasing penetration of washing machines in the country. These were certain things, obviously things that I thought could impact consumers' lives. And in the case of home improvement, a project where thinking about home improvement from the consumer's point of view as a project they had to undertake, as opposed to thousands of products that were to be sold separately.
Yeah,
or,
shifting from product-centric to customer-centric and
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. That's been an incredible innovation that's been going on, gosh, in full force in this century.
Absolutely. And it goes back to putting not only the consumer at the point of purchase, but their whole context. And if you think about it as the joy you get when you empower people to design their space. One of the clients I'm working with now, it's a company in Peru that is a market leader in terms of paints. Their purpose is to bring color, allow people to color the world they live in, bring color to the world they live in. You can just think about that as how uplifting and empowering that is to a consumer when they are able to, when their daughter asks them, I want my bedroom to be painted the color blue from Frozen, and they're able to actually go out and procure that color and actually get that done. So it's, again, in both of these contexts, you can understand why I was interested and why I cared about the challenge. What was different in the behaviors that I had to use in each of those cases was the people around and who were also involved in the challenge and why they cared. So in the first case, which was the launch of Whirlpool in India, for a lot of the employees, it was a big career change for them. They had come from jobs in other organizations, and they had taken a risk, moved their families, bought new homes, disrupted their lives to be part of this challenge. And so it was a burning platform. When we went through some tough times, it was a burning platform. And so the behavioral approach that I adopted was what was called unreasonable confidence. In all of the chaos that existed, I had a boss, in fact, who used the term. He said, Marise, unreasonable confidence is what we need to show at this time, because people have to believe and know that we will get through this.
Before you go on, explain a little bit what you mean by burning platform.
If we didn't succeed in the challenge that we were undertaking, it could have been that the company would close down. Whirlpool having entered into India, it was new. It was the time of just going global. It would have been quite easy for them to withdraw at that time, in which case you would have had a lot of people out of jobs, families disturbed. It would have been in India, changing jobs is not as common, at least in those days in the 90s, was not as common. And so for a lot of people who had joined, they had spent maybe 15, 20 years in their previous organization and given up that kind of career and track record to join Whirlpool at that time.
As you describe that, the vision of unreasonable confidence becomes forefront on my mind, and something that I would have and highly motivated to have in a situation where you're taking such a great risk, but for such a powerful and positive outcome where you can actually help improve the lives of consumers that would purchase the products.
Absolutely. And people had to trust me, and they had to trust the organization, and they also had to have confidence and understand where I was coming from. So they had to know that I had some ability to do this. So we would celebrate the small wins along the way. We would share information and the research so that as we were going forward on this path, there were some solid pieces of data and information and consumer insight that they knew that wasn't just wild ideas. Often I would match a consumer insight with information that people knew on the ground. So it's very powerful when I call it insight to instinct, which is when you share a consumer insight from a data report and somebody says, yes, let me give you this example of what you're saying. I've seen it in the marketplace. It may just be one or two, but when you have that match of insight to instinct, it helps people believe and trust in the information and sources of data that you're providing.
It's like giving you a clear picture of the roadmap of where you're going to is the right place.
Exactly. And then acknowledging when things go wrong, making sure that you are acknowledging that, sharing it, and saying, okay, yep, it's gone wrong. We know, but we've at least been able to measure it. We know it. Now let's shift course and let's see what we need to do to get back on track. Because when you take on a major, some of these changes and challenges that I talked about, they could take 18 months to 3 years. And as you go through that, people need to know that you've got the commitment, you're going to stick it out, as well as you care. You care about them, and you care about achieving the end result.
Because of the I don't know what the word for it is, the size of the endeavors that you're going on, I'm going to throw out the word, I hate to do it, agile, being able to adapt to changes in the environment, to track your path maybe in a different way, knowing that you're able to adapt, your organization's going to keep moving forward and not be rigid and go down with the ship, so to speak. I think that would give people a lot of confidence, especially when they see it happening.
Absolutely. And part of being agile is knowing the different parts and players in the organization well enough that you know what they can do and what they can bring to what piece they can play in this puzzle. You won't know the answer to everything. You'll just know it can be done. But it's the people who are closer to the end result who actually know how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you know that, if you've had that conversation, you know what drives them, you know what's part of their experience, you know how to unleash that creativity, as well as that commitment as you go through these 80-hour weeks and challenges and things which can be quite energy draining.
Yeah, if you're going to work at the executive level, the C-suite level for a large endeavor such as you're describing, you have to believe in your people and know some of their capabilities, their limitations, but holistically as an enterprise.
Yes, that's a great point. Holistically as well as individually.
Yes.
Yeah, I used to call it bringing about change, solving world hunger one mouth at a time.
Thanks for sharing the Whirlpool story. So what's the Lowe's example?
Lowe's as a company was doing pretty well, right? It was profitable. There was no burning platform, as was the case in Whirlpool in India. The change here was that the company had decided to embark on a strategy which was to put the consumer in the center. As you said, the move from product to consumer. And as part of that, the first behavior and the first thing that had to happen was making people who were involved in this think that it was worth doing. What was in it for them? Why should they go along with this journey and take on this kind of challenge? And so the behaviors we did at that time was we invested in the consumer insights, and we brought together the cross-functional teams, people who were doing wonderful jobs in their own functional areas, but we brought them together based on the consumer view of home improvement. So the person who was on bathroom products on the supply chain brought together with some of the different merchants who were buying the different products, together with some of the sales folks who were working in that area on the floor. So different parts of the customer journey, bringing all of those folks together so that they had a shared view of the customer journey. And then we went out and helped walk that customer journey and provide those insights. And as a result, there were a lot of ahas. I didn't know what those ahas would be, but when you put them in the room together, there were people who were all part of that seamless customer experience, but who would never talk to each other. They may have been on the same email chain, but they didn't know each other or had the opportunity to talk about how they did what they did and how it impacted the consumer. So it was very energizing for them to come together and say, oh, wow, we could do this. And it made things move as they decided on value propositions that were right for a bathroom remodel or right for a bathroom refresh or somebody who had to do a repair. There were things that they came up with and ideas that they were more nimble as they came together and came up with those ideas. And that came through whether, in terms of how they showed up on the website, how they went to market. And there were groups who it changed the way they thought about their jobs because they saw it as part of how they impacted the customer journey and not as an individual functional role. So it was energizing to see people talk to each other and learn more about their context. And that in itself was a reason for many that's what mattered to them. And that was their reason to participate in the change.
Yeah, there's two things in that story that I really, that resonate with me. One is that Lowe's decided to make this change, not when they're desperate, not when they're falling apart and running into financial ruin. They do it when they have the resources available and the capacity to focus on this type of a change rather than when you don't have those resources.
Yes. And I will say I'm sort of torn between the two because in some ways the burning platform helps galvanize the organization and align the organization much faster than when you've got opportunities and multiple ways you can grow. And why should I disrupt my life? Why should I put in those 80 hours or really bring about that change? There are so many ways and opportunities and different paths to follow that every function, every organization could look at different things to do.
That makes sense. That goes with the Whirlpool story, quite nicely. The other thing I notice, if you think about the process of Lowe's from supplies all the way to operations and selling to customers, what I liked about that story is not only did you create cross-functional teams and have people not focused on just their one element, one part of that overall process, but getting them to think about the customer journey. You not only brought them together to get out of their silos, so to speak, but you gave them, and like you said at the beginning, you gave them their why, their purpose for interacting together, and that opened up the opportunity for creativity.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also important to recognize that not everybody will think that way. You'll always have some folks who are resistant to a path. They want to see the proof. They want to see it work before they embark on it. And that's just something you have to have the resilience and bandwidth to absorb.
The resistance to change just because our brains in general don't like change, unless they're someone like you who actually has learned to adapt your brain in a way that you thrive on change.
Yes. And so that's why it's really important for me to recognize where I'm coming from, and that thriving on change may be good for me, but it's not what everybody wants. And so I have to keep telling myself that.
Yeah, recognizing where people are at and how do you meet them to bring them along to this journey.
Yes, or give them time. I use an analogy of sometimes
Ah,
when you go up after strategy, you get to base camp one, and sometimes you just have to rest for a bit, and then you're ready to scale the next piece, because you can't always be. You need to rest in between.
Part 3, From Believing to the Extraordinary. By now, you may have heard me talk about 7 principles of leadership. These are leadership principles that I derive from reading several leadership books, 16 of them. And I call them overt secrets because they're easy to understand just conceptually, or we think you understand, but you really don't. Some of them, believing in others, connecting with others, putting others first, giving up control. Very simple concepts, but they're highly relevant in what Marise has to share, and her advice to you exemplifies these
Knowing who you
principles.
are and then
Here's
taking the
Marise.
time to share those stories with other people is very much worthwhile if you are embarking on a leadership challenge. They need to know who you are, where you're coming from, what makes you tick. It's worth taking the time to tell them about your childhood. It's worth taking the time to talk about your home and your family, because that's the way they get to know you.
What you're conveying to me is a leadership principle that I've identified called connecting with others.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you do that, just like you said, you share personal stories and, in a sense, allow yourself to become a little bit vulnerable to being open with who you are, your background, and people gravitate to that.
Yes, absolutely. Hearing their stories as well. So, what did you do on the weekend? I repaired the path down my house. Okay, who did you do it with? What did you do? Where did you? By the time you go through hearing other people's stories, you have an idea of what really interests them, what matters to them. And that's important so that they feel heard, and so that they also know that you care about what happens to them.
You're just showing another point that you cannot and should not compartmentalize your life from work life, personal life. They're intertwined and you cannot separate the two. What affects you emotionally in your personal life outside of work is going to affect your work. And what affects you emotionally at work, you're going to carry it back home, whether positive or negative.
Absolutely. And it's so true in today's world, where it may not even be carry it back home. It might just be as you walk out of the room and walk into your living room again.
Yes, that's right. Turn off the Zoom and and and,
Yes.
and you're back home in that environment, and just
Yes.
reiterates the point that we really need to check in with people, find out how they're doing, because if they're not mentally in the right mindset, then they're not going to be able to be as productive. But sharing that, talking about that makes it easier for people to make that shift and to have that acknowledgement.
Absolutely. And then the second thing I would say is that believe in the ability to get extraordinary results from everyday people. It is amazing the potential that people have if you unleash it. And if you give them a framework so that it's well coordinated, and it's, that's sort of the role of the leader to bring that out. Often people think, oh, I don't have an expert in this, or I need a subject matter expert in that, or I need this A team to come in and change it all. No, I think that my experience is that it is the most satisfying times are when you can bring out those extraordinary results from everyday folk. who are existing on the team and who already know and have some experience with the business.
And to do that, you give them the space and set broad parameters, but you give them the opportunity to figure stuff out, and what they achieve can be, like you said, extraordinary.
Absolutely, yes. Challenge them and give them the space and the credit afterwards, obviously.
My thanks to Marise Kumar. If you'd like to learn more about her, go to the show notes. You'll find links there. Also, if you have any questions or comments, go to unlabelleadership.com and click the message icon. You can leave a message up to 1 minute. I might play it on the air. Thank you for your help and contributions. And thank you for listening to the show. Until next time, lead on.